Jimmy Swinnerton. So back in the early days of the newspaper comic strip, there were four main cartoonists working for the biggest syndicated comic strip outfit out there, owned by William Randolph Hearst, called eventually came to be called King Features Syndicate, which is still going today. There was Rudolph Dirks, who created for Hearst the Katzenjammer Kids, which was founded based on Wilhelm Busch's Max and Moritz. But that's neither here nor there for this conversation. Secondly, there was Frederick Opper, the veteran cartoonist who already had multiple decades as the leading cartoonist post Thomas Nast, the leading humor cartoonist in America, and for Puck magazine. And then he went over to Hearst and had a second amazing multi-decade career as a cartoonist. Of course, he created Happy Hooligan, as well as like 25 or 30 other comic series, including Maud the Mule and Alphonse and Gaston and Our Antediluvian Ancestors, early caveman comic strip. Anyway, the third was Richard Otcalt, who created The Yellow Kid, but that was for the New York World. Hearst hired him away from the New World, and for Hearst he created Buster Brown. It's kind of an overlooked, unappreciated comic today, but it was a big hit back then. So in your weekly Sunday Hearst comic newspaper comic supplement section, you would have comics by these three gentlemen and also Jimmy Swinnerton. And so we're going to talk about Jimmy Swinnerton today. This just came out. The Comic Art of Jimmy Swinnerton, edited by Peter Maresca and Michael Tisserand. Magnificent, huge book out from Sunday Press, distributed by Fantagraphics. And this is a wonderful thing to have because Swinnerton's kind of been overlooked. And it's time for his day in the sun is long overdue. So I'm thrilled this came out. And in fact, I had a part in it, a small part. And so I'm honored about that too. This, in fact, is my contributor's copy. So I was actually invited to write the introductory biographical essay. So let's see. Let's open it up for you. There's the Sunday Press logo in papers. Here is a large reproduction, full page, of an piece of original art by Swinnerton with color guides. Some of the panels are colored. No need to color every single one. This is just to tell the colorist, like, the stripes on that guy's shirt should be red and white. Look at that. This book, like all Sunday Press books, was designed by Philippe Guilmetti in France. And the guy's an amazing designer, musician too, and a publisher and an author. And then the next, when you turn the page, look at that full page, one panel cartoon comic. And who's that gentleman right there? That's Jimmy Swinnerton. This is a self-portrait in his beloved desert landscape. And then here's the introductory biographical essay by some character named Paul Tumey. Yonder is beauty. Go see for yourself. The story of Jimmy Swinnerton. This is mercifully, if I'm writing it, yeah, it is mercifully brief. It's unfortunately brief coverage, but it gives you an idea of the man's life. I didn't want to write a Wikipedia article, which is, just some facts, kind of presented in a haphazard way. So I had 4 weeks to research and write this, and I don't know how I did it. A deadline, man, give me a deadline and I can be so much more productive. I've been working on a book now for years on Milk Gross, and it's not it's not a very ambitious book, but I just keep going back and wanting to make it better and better and better. If somebody gave me a deadline, man, I'd have it out. Anyway, all that aside, I'm one of the writers in the book. Peter Maresca has several essays in the book. Michael Tisserand, author of the great George Harriman biography called Crazy, A Life in Black and White. He's got a couple of essays in this book, as well as having performed some editorial work on it. Eddie Campbell, the great cartoonist, he drew many great comics. The Alex series, he did From Hell. He worked with Alan Moore and drew From Hell. And lately he's been an amazing comics historian. He did an amazing book with Abrams Comic Arts on Will Eisner's instructional manuals for the military that he did post-Spirit. And then he did this amazing book called The Goat Getters about the early days of sports cartooning. And just now, and I hope this will be another video, he's released an amazing book on America's first great woman cartoonist, as he puts it, Kate Carew. So Eddie Campbell has a great essay in here about Swinnerton's early days in San Francisco. And then there's an amazing essay by Don Phelps on Little Jimmy, a wonderful lyrical, poetic essay that captures, what the magic is. It helps you connect to the magic of Swinnerton. And Phelps, of course, was a comics historian who passed away. I guess maybe it's been about 10 years now. So this is a reprint, but it's an essay not many people are going to remember. Now, I first knew about Swinnerton because of the Desert Connection through George Harriman. He was the guy, he worked with Harriman at Hearst. There were those four guys I mentioned, Opper, Dirks, Ockalt, and Swinnerton, but then there were others all working in the same room in New York, drawing these comics. Can you imagine what a creative madhouse that must have been? Thomas A. Dorgan, Tad, was there. His stuff was appearing on the sports page, mostly. And you had other people like Gus Monger, and George Harriman was there. And Swinnerton, when he got ill and had to go to the desert to recover, and he fell in love with the desert, and he introduced it to several other cartoonists, including George Harriman. And so that's how I know Harriman. Once Harriman visited the great dry seabed, which is the American Southwest, Utah, Arizona, the Grand Canyon, all that stuff, he started to incorporate it, into his comics. It became the landscape that Crazy Cat's in. In fact, it's situated in Coconino County, which is a real county. Swinnerton lived there. So it's the Harriman connection that I knew Swinnerton through. But now's a chance to really understand and study Swinnerton's comics. Want to just say, you get this nice bonus extra of 4 postcards, 4 facsimile postcard replicas. There's little Jimmy. There's one of my favorite Swinnerton characters, Mr. Jack, who fancies himself as a bit of a well-dressed rake womanizer. Not a PC character for today. Shows you how things have changed in 100+ years. But there's something kind of innocent about Swinnerton's comics, which I hope doesn't get lost as you look at as you have to deal with the different values of the era that he came out of. But from all accounts, he himself was a kind, gentle, decent person. And I don't know of any scandal associated with him whatsoever. Just give you a taste of some of the riches inside of this book. Now, like I said, when I was writing this essay, there's a Mr. Jack. I did my own research, right, for this, but I also used another Mr. Jack section. I have a little essay in front of that section. I used this book right here heavily. I had 4 weeks to do this. Give me a deadline, and did I say that already? I repeat myself. This great biography by Harold G. Davidson, Jimmy Swinnerton, the artist and his work. This is looking at Swinnerton through the lens of his second career, which is, known to a different segment of the population mostly, as a landscape painter of the American desert. And he started painting the American desert at a time when nobody painted those landscapes because they didn't see the desert as a place of beauty. It was seen largely as a place of, bleak, barren, without items of interest, and so on and so forth. But Swinnerton, man, he could find the beauty in a pile of rocks. And in fact, that's the name of the essay. It's a quote from Swinnerton, the essay that I wrote, called "Yonder is Beauty. Go see for yourself." Look at those cacti. So this author worked with the great comics historian Bill Blackbeard to understand the comics side of his career. And he does reproduce just a few bits of his comics. The format of this book is really to present rectangular landscape paintings. It's a rectangle itself, and it's kind of small, and it's kind of part of a series of books that this guy did about landscape painters of the desert. So Western painters, I guess you'd say. So he, this is his. This package makes sense from the world that Harold Davidson comes from, but Blackbeard criticized it heavily in a review in Nemo, and I let that color my understanding of this book. I read it, checked out a library, read it, was like, meh, not enough about his life as a cartoonist, but I used this as a basis for research, and unfortunately, he doesn't cite his sources. That's the one criticism I have about this book. But I ran across many of the same sources that Harold found and used, and I can tell you that they exist, and he did a great job. And the information in here, as far as I can tell, is accurate, or as accurate as it can be without being able to sit down and interview Swinnerton and actually get honest answers about some of these things. So hats off to Harold G. Davidson. Thank you, man. And I also found lots of other sources of research. And one thing I found early in his career, Swinnerton started out, okay? His first job as an artist was working for the San Francisco Examiner. I forget the year, but it was pretty early, let's see if I can find it in here. I want to say 1885, 1890. No, it wouldn't have been 1890. 1892. Around the end of summer in 1892, Hearst hired 16-year-old Jimmy as staff artist on his paper, the San Francisco Examiner. And one of Swinnerton's first assignments was to accompany a writer. He was the artist, because back then they didn't publish photographs the way newspapers came to do a few years later. So cartoonists often were also working as journalistic sketch artists, right? And they would go to the scene of the crime or the scene of the event, and they would make some sketches, and they would come back to the office, and they would finish them, and that would give people a visual to go with the, if you ever see these old newspapers, just like a tidal wave of tiny type to read. So the visuals were very important. Of course, Hearst understood the importance of visuals early on. Anyway, Swinnerton goes with this reporter, and they are tracking down a notorious band of bank robbers, a gang of bank robbers who are hiding out in the hills outside of San Francisco. And let's see, I'll read you a little bit from my essay here. A 1942 trade journal account that was, I believe, editor and publisher. I didn't cite my sources in here either. Peter didn't want footnotes, so he likes to not have footnotes on these essays. He wants to try to. That's his format, so I honor that. If I were publishing this, I would have included source notes. But in any case, 1942 trade journal account tells how young Jimmy was sent to quote, to hunt down with the sheriff's posse the notorious train robbers, Chris Evans and John Sontag, names that made God-fearing, law-abiding citizens tremble in those days. These were bad men, dangerous men. And Swinnerton was to draw sketches since news photographers were unknown in those days. I love this detail. He drew his sketches, put them on a raft, and floated them down Kings River, where they were picked up and rushed to San Francisco on horseback and published in the newspaper. How cool is that, man? Oh, man. And I found the autobiography of the news reporter that Swinnerton went with on that assignment. And he has a great anecdote that I'm going to read you. Swinnerton's companion on this risky assignment, Examiner writer Chris Michelson, later wrote about the adventure. Quote, "It was bitterly cold trekking through the snow, and we each had on 2 of the heaviest suits of underclothes we could find. One night I woke up in camp pretty cold and discovered that I only had 1 suit of underwear on. I investigated and found that my sleeping partner had on 3 suits of underwear. How or where the shift occurred, I will never find out." So I like sticking in little pieces like that, especially when you can quote from someone who was there, a primary source, as color. And it gives you a sense of the humor and the rough-hewn world that Swinnerton came from. And how his amazing, gracefully drawn, extremely funny comics came out of that world, and of course out of the work of Jimmy Swinnerton and his colleagues of this era, the modern comic came to emerge. But also another thing emerged out of this same template, which was silent comedy films and the American sense of humor and our love of visual and the whole thing. And there is so much in here to enjoy, and there's a little bit you're going to be challenged by. I was. This right here, right? This is not something that we appreciate as modern readers. This is a stereotypical portrayal of an African American. However, if you read the great essay that's in front of this section by Michael Tisserand, who has an even longer essay on Swinnerton in the West, by the way, you will discover in here that what's going on in these comic strips featuring this character named Sam is something kind of unusual, very unusual for the time, and it's not making fun of Sam at all. It's Sam making fun of white people and the pretensions of white people's society. And Swinnerton himself was kind of always an outsider. And he was kind of a lone wolf. You know, it's the guy who would go out into the desert for weeks and paint. And that's what he liked to do. He also, though, socialized and hobnobbed, at William Randolph Hearst's parties with movie stars and wealthy people. There's so much in here, man. This book, reproduces the comics in large format, close to size. Believe it or not, the originals are even larger. And original color, they're impeccably restored by Peter Maresca, impeccably curated. There are so many treasures in here. It is just an overwhelmingly wonderful collection. It includes a large group of comics, featuring Swinnerton's character, Little Jimmy, who's a forgetful young boy. And Swinnerton kind of patterned Jimmy on himself, I think. I call Jimmy the first neurodivergent comic strip character. I don't know if he's the first, but he is easily distracted. So I think Swinnerton understood something about that, and it's not like the violence and the craziness and the chaos of the Katzenjammer Kids. It's a gentler form of humor, a toned down, more nuanced style of humor that you'll find in Swinnerton's comics. And I, as a modern reader, I really appreciate that. There's sections on other characters as well, and even a section on Swinnerton's last comic strip, Rocky Mason, who's a lawman in the West. And Swinnerton drew on stories of his own experiences, like what I was sharing with you earlier about tracking down the bandits. So there you have it, a little bit about this amazing book. Yonder is Beauty. Go see for yourself.